What does it mean to conquer? The word conjures images of storming walls, of flashing swords, of a final cataclysmic battle beneath a blood-red sun. History loves these moments. They are clean, they are dramatic, they fit neatly onto a page. But what of the conquest that has no single glorious moment? The victory that is not an event, but a process. A slow, inexorable tide that rises not from the clash of armies, but from the silent, patient workings of time itself. This is the story of such a conquest. It is the story of how one of history's most legendary warriors, Sultan Saladin, reclaimed Islam's third holiest city, Jerusalem, not by doing everything, but by strategically, masterfully, doing nothing for 15 years. It is a story not of a battle, but of a siege not of stone walls, but of human nature, political folly, and the relentless decay of a kingdom that carried the seeds of its own destruction. To understand the patience of the man, we must first understand his pain. Our story truly begins not in 1187, the year of his triumph, but in 1174. A younger Saladin, fresh from unifying Egypt and Syria, brimming with ambition and religious fervor, moves against the Crusader Kingdom. He meets the Frankish army at Montgisard, and there he is dealt a humiliating, shattering defeat. The Frankish force, though outnumbered, was led by a singular figure, a teenage king, Baldwin IV, who was not only a brilliant tactician, but was also slowly being consumed by leprosy. This was Saladin's first brutal lesson. The kingdom of Jerusalem was not a rotten fruit ready to fall. It was a formidable fortress, galvanized by a leader of immense will. Saladin, the warrior, had been bested. He retreated. He licked his wounds, and in the quiet of his tent, surrounded by the whispers of disappointed emirs and the ghosts of his fallen men, a new strategy began to form. It was a strategy born not of rage, but of cold, clear-eyed observation. He saw that the Crusader states were not a monolith. They were a fragile patchwork of rival barons, Italian merchant factions, and militant religious orders, all held together by a thread, the authority of the king. And that king, the magnificent Baldwin IV, was dying. Saladin, the warrior, began his transformation into Saladin, the gardener. And a gardener knows you cannot force a tree to bear fruit. You can only tend the soil, ensure the sun, and wait. And so the long wait began. To his own men, it must have seemed like paralysis. Year after year, the provocations came, and none was more provocative than Reynald of Châtillon, the Lord of Ultrajourdain. Reynald was a force of pure, unadulterated chaos. He was a pirate, a rogue, a fanatic. He broke truces with a smirk. He launched raids on Red Sea ports, threatening the pilgrim route to Mecca itself. He slaughtered innocent caravans, taunting the Sultan. The young Mamluk captains in Saladin's army would seethe with rage. His own brother, Aladil, would beg for the chance to lead an army and burn Reynald's fortress at Kerak to the ground. The pressure to act, to retaliate, to satisfy the demands of honor was immense. But Saladin's response was always the same: a calm, resolute no. This was not weakness. This was the core of his genius. He understood that Reynald was a bait. Attacking Reynald would be a costly, draining sideshow. It would unite the fractious Crusader barons against a common enemy. It would bleed Saladin's resources and morale in a protracted siege, while the real prize, Jerusalem, remained out of reach. His inaction was, in fact, a profound action. Every time Reynald broke a truce, Saladin would send a formal diplomatic complaint to King Baldwin. He was, in effect, forcing the sick king to confront his own unruly vassal. He was pouring salt into the political divisions within the Kingdom of Jerusalem. While the Crusaders squabbled, Saladin consolidated. He used these years to secure his flanks, making peace with the Byzantine Empire and neutralizing threats from within the Muslim world. He was weaving a vast, unbreakable net, while his enemies were busy unraveling their own rope. He was practicing a form of psychological and political jujitsu. He was using his enemy's greatest weakness, their internal discord and reckless aggression, as the very weapon that would destroy them. And then, the clockwork of fate began to turn. The ticking that Saladin had heard for a decade and a half grew louder. King Baldwin IV, the leper king, the one man who had held the kingdom together through sheer force of will, finally succumbed to his disease. The thread snapped. The succession was a disaster. The throne passed briefly to his nephew, a child who died within a year, and then into the hands of his sister, Sibylla, and her husband, Guy of Lusignan. Guy was everything Baldwin was not: weak, vacillating, politically inept, and utterly dominated by the one man who saw him as a tool, Reynald de Châtillon. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was now split into two warring camps: the faction of Raymond of Tripoli, who advocated for peace and coexistence with Saladin, and the faction of Guy and Reynald, who thirsted for a holy war they were incapable of winning. The fruit, which Saladin had watched for so long, was now not just ripe, it was putrid. The tree was hollow. It was ready to fall. And then, Reynald, unable to help himself, delivered the final perfect gift. He attacked another massive caravan, violating a truce brokered by Saladin himself. He had given the Sultan the one thing he had been waiting for: a casus belli so blatant, so insulting, that every Muslim from Cairo to Baghdad would rally to the banner of jihad. The 15 years of patience were over. The net was cast. The Battle of Hattin was not a battle. It was a harvest. Saladin did not have to fight for victory. He merely had to collect it. He lured the dehydrated, divided Crusader army into the waterless hills near the Sea of Galilee. He chose the ground. He controlled the wells. The Frankish army, led by the incompetent Guy and the hateful Reynald, was not defeated. It was annihilated. The true cross, their most sacred relic, was captured. In the aftermath, Saladin's tent became a stage for the final act of his 15-year drama. When the captured King Guy, parched with thirst, was brought before him, Saladin offered him a cup of iced rosewater. It was a gesture of royal mercy. But when Guy passed the cup to Reynald, Saladin intervened. "I did not give him water," he said, and with that he personally executed the man whose reckless evil he had so patiently cultivated for a decade and a half. Reynald was not just an enemy. He was a tool that had outlived its usefulness. With the army of Jerusalem destroyed, the city itself had no defenders. There was no need for a long, bloody siege. On October 2, 1187, Saladin entered Jerusalem not as a blood-soaked conqueror, but as fulfilling a divine promise. he took the city with astonishing mercy, in stark contrast to the bloody massacre perpetrated by the First Crusade 90 years prior. So, did Saladin conquer Jerusalem by doing nothing for 15 years? The answer is yes and no. He did not do nothing. He did something far more difficult, far more taxing on the human spirit than any military campaign. He waited. He endured. He absorbed insults. He played the long game in a world obsessed with the short term. His conquest was not of stone and mortar, but of circumstance. He conquered time. He conquered impulse. He understood that the most resilient structures are not those with the thickest walls, but those with the strongest foundations. And he watched, with the patience of a geologist, as the foundation of his enemy's kingdom crumbled into sand. The story of Saladin and Jerusalem is a lesson for the ages. It teaches us that true strength is not always demonstrated in action, but sometimes in profound strategic restraint. That the most significant victories are often won not on the battlefield, but in the quiet spaces in between, in the council tent, in the diplomat's letter, and in the unwavering heart of a leader who has the vision to see not just the next move, but the final one, 15 years down the road. His greatest weapon was not his scimitar. It was his patience,